The body was found on a Tuesday. A county maintenance worker driving the access road along the Cumberland River in rural Pulaski County, Tennessee, spotted it just after 6 in the morning on November 4, 1986. The man was face up in a shallow drainage ditch. No wallet, no identification, no keys. He was somewhere in his late 20s, brown hair, average build, wearing a denim jacket and work boots that had been resold more than once. He had been dead for at least 2 days. In 38 years, no one would ever come to claim him. That is not a story about a man who didn't matter. That is a story about a system that failed him, and about one small detail that outlasted everything else. A tattoo, roughly the size of a playing card, inked carefully on the inside of his left forearm. A single rose with detailed petals and a curling stem. And beneath it, in cursive letters, one name: Eleanor. It would take 4 decades, the invention of forensic genealogy, a retired detective living in his daughter's guest room in Chattanooga, and a woman in West Virginia who had kept her grandmother's old scrapbook to finally give that man his name back. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to the beginning. Because to understand what was lost that November morning, you first have to understand who Danny Ray Hargrove was. Danny grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia, in a part of town where every neighbor knew your first name, and the front door was never locked. He was the youngest of 4 children in a household that ran on routine and loyalty. Dinner at 6, church on Sunday, the same summer fishing hole every July. His mother, Lorraine, worked the early shift in the county hospital laundry for 22 years. His father, Gerald, ran a small engine repair shop out of their garage on Spruce Street. It was not an easy life in the way that mattered on paper. It was a whole one in every way that mattered to the people living it. Danny was the kid who fixed the neighbor's bicycle without being asked, who remembered everyone's birthday, who would stop whatever he was doing if he heard someone needed a hand. His older sister, Carol, who was 3 years ahead of him, described him later as the kind of person who made a room feel slightly more settled just by walking into it. Not loud, not showy, just present, in a way that some people simply are. He had done 2 years in the Army after high school, come home to Morgantown, and worked a series of jobs: a furniture plant east of town, a construction crew in Charleston, a short-haul trucking run out of Beckley. He was restless in the way certain young men are, not unhappy, just not yet arrived at whatever the next thing was. His friends from those years remembered him as easy company, someone who paid his tab and didn't complain. That October of 1986, Danny told his mother he was heading south for a few weeks. A cousin in Nashville had mentioned a warehouse logistics position, something worth checking out. Lorraine packed him sandwiches and 2 thermoses of coffee for the drive. She stood in the driveway on a Saturday morning when the maples on Spruce Street were at their peak, red and gold all the way down the block, and hugged him at the car door. He was 27 years old. He told her he'd call when he arrived. The one thing everyone from those years remembered about Danny Hargrove was the tattoo. He had gotten it on his 21st birthday from a parlor in downtown Morgantown. A climbing rose with careful shading, and beneath it the name Eleanor, his grandmother's name. Eleanor Hargrove had helped raise him while Lorraine worked early shifts, had taught him to bake cornbread from memory and to play cribbage on her back porch. She had died the year before Danny turned 21, and the tattoo was his way of keeping her somewhere permanent. He came home that birthday night and showed it to his mother, rolling up his sleeve at the kitchen table. Lorraine cried. The good kind. Nobody knew that tattoo would one day be the only thing left of him that anyone could find. He never made it to Nashville. What investigators would eventually piece together placed Danny somewhere along the Interstate 40 corridor in western Tennessee in the final days of October 1986. Possibly hitchhiking. Possibly riding with someone he had met at a truck stop along the way. The exact route he took from Morgantown has never been fully established. What is clear is the timeline of what came next. At some point between October 28th and November 1st, Danny Ray Hargrove was killed. The Pulaski County Medical Examiner's report, filed November 6th, listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. There were no defensive wounds. It had been fast. The body showed evidence of having been moved. The drainage ditch was too clean. Too deliberate for someone who had died where he lay. Someone had relocated him to that ditch after the fact. Someone who knew those back roads in the dark. He had nothing on him to say who he was. The denim jacket had no manufacturer tags. The work boots were a brand sold at every farm supply store from Ohio to Georgia. Investigators with the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office canvassed the surrounding area. A truck stop 4 miles north of the site. A roadside diner, a weekly rate motel outside Somerset. No one recognized the composite sketch. No one reported a man matching his description passing through. The tip line received 11 calls in the first 10 days. None of them led anywhere. By Thanksgiving, the composite was filed. The unidentified man was assigned a case number, John Doe 86144, and buried in a county cemetery plot under a plain marker. The case was left open in the technical sense. In every practical sense, by December of 1986, it was done. In Morgantown, the calls home had simply stopped. Lorraine Hargrove called the Nashville cousin in early November. He had not seen Danny. He didn't even know Danny had been planning to visit. She called Danny's last employer, then the one before that. She called Army friends, a woman Danny had dated on and off for 2 years. She filed a missing persons report with the Morgantown Police Department on November 14, 1986. The officer who took her report was kind. He told her adult men disappeared all the time, that most came back, that she should keep trying the numbers she already had. Detective Ronald Meacham of the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office was the primary investigator on John Doe 86114. He was 44 years old, a 20-year veteran of Tennessee law enforcement, the kind of detective who kept handwritten notes in spiral notebooks and cross-referenced his own work twice. He spent 3 months on the case before the caseload made it impossible to continue at that intensity. By the spring of 1987, his spiral notebook for 86114 was on a shelf, not discarded, just displaced by everything that came after. The early investigation had 2 leads, and both dissolved. The first was a long-haul trucker who was a regular at the stop 4 miles north of the dump site and had been seen arguing with a young man matching the description on the weekend in question. His logbook placed him in Memphis on Halloween night, and when investigators cross-referenced his fuel receipts and way station records, the alibi held. The second was a local man with a prior assault conviction who lived 3 miles from the drainage ditch. A solid suspect on paper. But his medical records placed him in a Knoxville hospital during the relevant window, and investigators could not put him anywhere near the scene. By April 1987, the leads had run out. What Meacham could not put down, and would say so, clearly, nearly 4 decades later, was the tattoo. Detailed, personal, a specific name. Somewhere, he wrote in his notebook, is a family that knows that name. Lorraine never stopped through the late 80s and into the 90s. She wrote letters to sheriff's departments across Tennessee and Kentucky, to the Salvation Army, to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Persons when it expanded its adult caseload. Every year on Danny's birthday, October 3rd, she set a place for him at the dinner table. Her other children eventually stopped mentioning it. They understood it was hers to carry. By 1994, 8 years had passed. A tremor had developed in Lorraine's right hand. Carol, Danny's older sister, had quietly taken over the letter writing. She kept a binder, thick, organized, handwritten, of every agency she'd contacted, every response she'd received, every dead end cataloged by date and correspondent. By 2001, 15 years in, the binder had grown to 3 volumes. The house next door on Spruce Street had been sold twice since Danny left. The engine shop Gerald had run was converted to a storage facility. The children who had grown up on that block were parents themselves now, packing their own kids' lunches, worrying about their own lives. The world had moved in the continuous, indifferent way that worlds move, and the Hargroves had stayed still at the center of a question that never closed. The reward poster Carol had sent to a diner near the Tennessee border in 1989 had long since faded to pale outlines, but the diner owner had never taken it down. Lorraine Hargrove died in the spring of 2019 at 81 years old in a bedroom in Carol's house in Morgantown. She had never stopped hoping, Carol would say afterward. She had just gotten tired. She never knew. And in some ways, Carol said later, not knowing was its own kind of mercy, because knowing what they now know, that Danny had been gone since October 1986, that he had been buried under a number in a Tennessee field for 33 years by then, would have been a different kind of grief entirely. Before we continue, the research behind stories like Danny's takes weeks of digging through records, verifying dates, and piecing together lives that deserved better. If you want this channel to keep uncovering the truth behind cold cases like this one, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It means more than you know. Now, let's get back to Danny. The case had been cold for 37 years when, in the winter of 2023, something happened that no one had anticipated. It started not with a detective. It started with a database upload. In 2021, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation launched a systematic project to digitize its oldest unresolved John Doe cases and submit them to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, the federal clearinghouse where families can search descriptions against unidentified remains. A forensic genealogist named Patricia Sue, contracted to assist with the upload, was reviewing case files in batches. In February 2023, she pulled up John Doe 86144 for the first time in, by any estimate, over 2 decades. She noticed something in Matcham's original 1986 report that had never been flagged in any subsequent review. Under physical description, Matcham had noted the forearm tattoo, the rose, the name Eleanor, and had gone further than most. He had measured the tattoo, noted the style of the cursive lettering, and had commissioned a forensic artist to render it on paper. The rendering was still in the file. The capital E in Eleanor had a distinctive outward flourish. Matcham had noted, consistent with a particular style common in Appalachian tattoo parlors of the 1970s and early 80s. Sa uploaded the rendering to NamUs on March 7, 2023. In the searchable description fields, she typed, "Rose tattoo, forearm, left arm, name Eleanor in cursive script, distinctive capital E." The process works simply. Details uploaded to NamUs become searchable by families, advocates, and researchers looking for matches with their own missing persons cases. It is, in essence, the same database logic as Ancestry websites. But for the lost. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in April 2023, Carol Hargrove's daughter Jessica, 34 years old, a teacher in Morgantown, who had grown up hearing the story of her missing uncle the way other families tell stories about wars or migrations, was online searching for advocacy resources for long-term missing persons cases. She had inherited some of her grandmother's stubbornness about this. She entered search terms she had tried before. Then she tried new ones. She found NamUs. She entered male missing 1986, West Virginia. The results were not an exact match. But one of the suggested cases in a neighboring state caught her attention. She clicked on Tennessee John Doe 86144. She read the physical description: brown hair, late 20s, work boots, denim jacket, left forearm, rose tattoo, name Eleanor in cursive. Jessica Hargrove said later that she had to sit down on the bathroom floor and breathe for several minutes before she could call her mother. What followed moved faster than anything the Hargrove family had experienced in 37 years of searching. Carol provided a DNA sample to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation on May 2, 2023. Forensic genealogical DNA analysis, a process that compares biological material from unidentified remains against genetic profiles contributed by family members or uploaded to ancestry databases, then traces the family tree outward until a specific identity emerges, was completed in 11 weeks. The technique did not exist in any practical form in 1986. It had become, by 2023, the most powerful cold case tool in law enforcement's history. The sibling index match probability came back at 99.97%. The man in the Pulaski County Cemetery was Carol Hargrove's brother. He was Danny Ray Hargrove, born October 3, 1959, in Morgantown, West Virginia. 27 years old when he died, a veteran, a son, a brother, a man who had put his grandmother's name on his arm and kept it there until the end. On a Thursday morning in July 2023, in a house in Chattanooga where he had been living with his daughter since a mild stroke the previous year, retired Detective Ronald Matcham received a phone call from the TBI. His daughter, who was in the next room, heard only his side of the conversation, a long quiet, and then a single sentence. I knew that tattoo would be the thing. He was 81 years old. He had been right. The identification reopened the criminal investigation with fresh resources and updated forensic technology. The original dump site was re-examined. The case files Meacham had kept, 3 spiral notebooks in a cardboard box in his closet, which his daughter had assumed for years were old case logs, were reviewed by TBI investigators and found to contain details that had never been entered into any digital system, including a name, circled twice in blue ink, that Meacham had noted as a person of interest he was never able to fully eliminate. A man who had worked seasonal routes for a produce distributor through the I-40 corridor in the mid-1980s, known to stop regularly at the truck stop 4 miles from the dump site. Known to investigators in 2 adjacent counties for an assault charge in 1982 that had been reduced to a misdemeanor. That man died in Knoxville in 2009. As of this recording, no formal charges have been filed. The case remains officially open as a homicide investigation. But the TBI has stated publicly that the evidence is focused and that investigators believe they understand the circumstances of Danny's death. The Hargrove family has been briefed. They have said that while they grieve that the person responsible will not stand trial, they have received what they needed most: Danny's name given back to him, his records corrected, his grave marker updated with his full name, his birth year, his home state. He no longer lies under a number. On October 3, 2023, what would have been Danny Ray Hargrove's 64th birthday, Carol and Jessica and a group of extended family drove from Morgantown, West Virginia to Pulaski County, Tennessee. They brought flowers from a garden Carol had kept for 20 years in her backyard. They brought a photograph of Danny in his Army dress uniform, 20 years old, grinning at something off to the left of the camera. And they brought a piece of cornbread wrapped in a dish towel, because Eleanor Hargrove had always made it from memory, and Danny had learned it from her, and it seemed like the right thing to carry to a place he had waited too long to be found. Danny Ray Hargrove spent 38 years in a Tennessee field under a number instead of a name. He spent 38 years as a question that only his family kept asking. Every letter Lorraine wrote, every binder Carol filled. Every year the table was set with one extra place on October 3rd. Here is what 38 years could not erase. One rose, one name, and the decision a 21-year-old man made to keep his grandmother somewhere permanent. That tattoo was the last thing anyone expected to matter. It turned out to be the only thing that did. Carol Hargrove, in an interview following the identification, said she thinks about her mother every single day now. She thinks about all the envelopes Lorraine stamped, all the forms she filled out, all the evenings she sat by a phone that didn't ring, and she thinks about one thing her mother said near the end, that she could still feel Danny out there somewhere, that a mother knows. She was right. She just never got to hear anyone say so. Justice, in cases like this, does not always arrive on time. It doesn't always arrive in the form we hoped for, or in the courtroom we imagined. Sometimes it arrives as a name restored to a grave marker, decades overdue, and a family who finally has somewhere to go to say goodbye. That is a small thing. It is also everything. Think about this. How many other John Does in case files across this country have a single detail, a tattoo, a ring, a scar, that connects them to a family still searching? The Name Us database is public and searchable. Sometimes it only takes one person, on one Thursday evening, clicking the right link. What does it say about the justice system that Danny waited 38 years while that detail sat in a case file? What does it say about family love that Carol kept 3 binders of letters when the world had moved on? And what does it tell us about the people we carry? In memory, in grief, in ink, that a rose and a name outlasted everything else? Justice found Danny Ray Hargrove after 38 years. Stories like his are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe. More cases are waiting in the description below. Danny Hargrove. October 3rd, 1959. Finally home.